Thank you again for tuning in to Bible Truth and Prophecy. I'm Mark Lindsted, and I'm doing a subject that Dr. Lindsted has asked me to cover. We laid the groundwork for this subject yesterday as we saw things in Israel as we tried to change your view of some of the biblical stories. I know that my uncle, Dr. Lindsted, has done this for you when it comes to the Nativity. And we talk about how it was more than likely in a cave rather than in a wooden manger at a wooden barn. And it was probably a stone manger and a stone cave for the animals to be held in. And we were looking at the wise men. And we're trying to understand maybe a little bit more about the wise men than we knew before. Remember, the wise men were not just little old men. The wise men were the chief soothsayers or the chief astrologers or magicians or predictionists of the Medo-Persian Empire. In fact, they were so well regarded and renowned that when there was a conquering of the nation, they were even brought into the next empire and given prominent roles there. And just as we were closing for the day, we started to talk about how the Jewish influence of this was. We started to say, how did the Jewish people influence the Magi or the Magos or the Chaldeans? We saw that they were a counterfeit religion. They worshipped fire as their primary element. And they had a altar that burned constantly. And they had a blood sacrifice where they consumed that one that was sacrificed. And we saw how that looks directly at things like the tabernacle, where God dwelt as a pillar of fire. And we look at the altar of incense in the tabernacle that burns constantly. And we look at ourselves as we take the remembrance meeting, as we think about the bread and the wine as the symbols of the body and blood of Christ. So we see they're a counterfeit religion who were influenced by the Jewish people. And now we're going to see exactly what Jewish people influenced them. We were left off in Jeremiah, where they had come and conquered the area. And now we're in Daniel chapter 1. And we're going to read here, beginning in verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with the part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels unto the treasure of the house of his God. And the king spake to Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes. And here we see that the children in whom had no blemish were certain ones, one of them being Daniel. Daniel was part of those children that were taken by the Chaldeans to learn their ways and to learn their tongue. And in there we also saw that not only Daniel, but Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were taken as well. And they were given new names, of course, in the empire there. And Daniel became known as Belteshazzar. Mishael came to be known as Meshach. Hananiah became known as Shadrach, and Azariah became known as Abednego. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we know exactly who they are. Remember, they were thrown into a fiery furnace and delivered from that. Well, Daniel purposed in his heart that he wasn't going to worship their gods. He was going to worship his God only. But he was taken by these people, and he was taught their ways. Now, but how does that really give the Jewish influence over the Chaldeans? Because I'm pretty sure the things that they did in their monotheism probably came after this point. And how can we say the Jewish people had an influence in that? Well, if you look into chapter 2, we'll start to see exactly where this comes from. Chapter 2, verse 1. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep did break from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. Now there those people group are again, the sorcerers, the magicians, those who would be able to help understand the dream came. In fact, if we look at some of these verbs or some of these words, we see the magicians is Strong's word H2748, or shartim or chatam, a diviner, a magician, or an astrologer. And as we go further, we see in chapter 2, verse 10, it says the Chaldeans answered. And if you look up the Chaldeans, that's Strong's word H3779, kasdai. And that means a magician or a professional astrologer. Well, let's continue on in this story here for just a moment as we read along in verse 3. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation thereof. And the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut into pieces, and your houses be made into a dunghill. What do you think about that for a punishment from now on? If you don't do what you said you're going to do, or if you can't do like you say you can do, or you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to cut you in pieces, and I'm going to turn your house into a dung heap. Pretty stiff punishment. And as we read on, we see that these Chaldeans said to the king, there's no way we can tell you the interpretation of the dream unless we have the dream, and we can't know the dream. We can't tell you exactly what it is. In verse 6 it says, but if ye show me the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. And they answered again and said, let the king tell the servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation of it. The king answered and said, I know of certainty that ye would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known unto me my dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that ye can show me the interpretation thereof. And the Chaldeans answered and said before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth. Get that? There's not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asks such things at any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. And we see from here that the king gets so angry, a decree goes forth, and he says, okay, if you're not going to tell me, I'm going to have every one of you slain. I'm going to have all of the wise men, the Magi, the Chaldeans, slain because they can't tell me the interpretation thereof. And it's interesting what happens. Where do they go when this happens? They go to Daniel. They say, oh, Daniel, help us. Help us with this. And Daniel says to them, he says, wow, what's happened here? See, verse 12, for this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy the wise men, Magi, of Babylon. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain. And they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Daniel wasn't even there, according to the account we see. But Daniel went in and he said, I desire the king what would give him. And it's interesting as we go, and he said, then Daniel answered to him and said, this is verse 14, answered with counsel and with wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, with what was gone before to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree hasty from the king? Then Arioch made known the thing to Daniel. Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, that he would show the king's interpretation. And then Daniel went to his house. Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. and they would desire the mercies of God of heaven to concern this secret, and Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And we know as we go forward that Daniel asked for God to give him the interpretation therefore of the dream, so he could go back to Nebuchadnezzar and say, okay, here's your dream, and here's what it means. And we know the dream for Nebuchadnezzar was spectacular. You know, he got to the part of the head of gold and he didn't care about the rest of it. He didn't mind that it was destroyed. He just was so happy that he was the head of gold. And as Daniel did this, you know, he was elevated so far that he became one of the highest men in the land. And it's interesting as we look at verse 46 here. See here, verse 46. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation of sweet odors unto him. And the king answered Daniel and said, of truth it is that your God is a God of gods, meaning he's the high God, and the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal the secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and the chief of governors over all the wise men. And if you look that up, magi. He made him ruler over all the magi. So now we can start to see the influence of the Jewish people on the magi, who would become the wise men. 600 years before the birth of Christ, a Hebrew prophet has influence over the magi. What an interesting thing to think about here. Daniel is made their chief. He is the head of all of this. He is the one that they have to report to. And now that he's a godly man, I'm certain that he began teaching the Messianic scriptures to the Magi, to the Chaldeans, to tell them exactly how they should go forth. Daniel chapter 4, beginning in verse 7, we continue on here. Then came the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them, and they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But at last Daniel came in before, whose name was Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians. And there we see it is again, master of the magicians. He is the leader of the Magi. He is the one that gives the Magi the Jewish background, the looking for the Messiah. So here we can see now where they might have come up with their fire as being their primary element. Because in the tabernacle, God dwelt in fire there. And then we go over to Daniel chapter 6 and we see a plot to kill Daniel. And this plot doesn't come from the wise men. It doesn't come from the Magi or the Chaldeans. It comes from the governors. They're so angry that Nebuchadnezzar has put him in control of everything. In fact, he's basically second only to the king. And they're so angry at this, they have a ploy or a plot to get him killed. And they know that he worships God and God only. So they go forward, they make a decree that it's against the law to worship anybody but their gods, not Yahweh, not Jehovah, because they know Daniel can't do that. And the king signs a decree before he even knows what's happening. And we see that Daniel is set on a path of betrayal. And in this path of betrayal, the king comes to Daniel, and he's so sorry. He so laments what has happened. But when we turn over to chapter 6, we begin in verse 16, we see how the king really feels about Daniel's God. Chapter 6, verse 16 says, Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel, and he cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. See, Daniel serves the Almighty God, the all-powerful God, and the king knows this. And the stone was brought and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords. that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. And the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and in his sleep went from him. And the king arose very early. You see, the king loved Daniel so much, he arose very early in the morning and went in haste to see Daniel in the lion's den. And when it came to the den, he cried with lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said, Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions. Then Daniel unto the king said, O king, live forever. And we see what happens later on is that those who plotted against Daniel are thrown in the lion's den and their houses are laid waste. But we see that the king recognizes that Daniel serves the living God. And again, he is in that prominent place. And he's king. He's not king, but he's ruler, I should say, over the Magi, over the wise men, over the Chaldeans. And as we go into the New Testament now, into the book of Matthew, chapter 2, and we start back up with our story where we started yesterday. And it says in chapter 2, verse 1, Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. Wow, what an interesting thing. The reason the Magi were looking for the birth of the Messiah was because Daniel was the ruler of the Magi 600 years ago. Only God could inspire this book, could inspire the words written in. Only God, man himself, over 600 years could not have written this story. It would not have made sense. It wouldn't have lined up only by the inspired word of God. And as we continue on, we see in verse 3, it says, When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Well, what does he mean he was troubled? Was he just a little worried? Well, that word trouble, as we see, as we look it up, troubled in Strong's is as G5015, tarasso. And it really means to agitate, to cause inward commotion, to take away calmness of mind, to make restless, to stir up, to render anxious or distressed, to strike one's spirit with fear and dread. That's my favorite of all of those, to strike one's spirit with fear or dread. I love it. Herod his heart is tossed into this washing machine and he's distressed. Do you think he was distressed that 3 little old men on camels came with gifts for a little baby born? No, not at all. He was terrified because the kingmakers of the East, the Magi, the Chaldeans, the Magos, had come and said, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? And Herod said, Wait a minute, didn't Caesar give me that? I'm King of the Jews. What do you mean, where is he born King of the Jews? What an interesting thing. What an interesting thing. Herod is troubled to find out that these kingmakers are in his land looking to crown someone King of the Jews other than him. You know, oftentimes we hear that there were 3 wise men came to Bethlehem bringing gifts. But was it really 3? That's been assumed by people, I think, for thousands of years wrong. And this is because of the 3 gifts that were given. They think, whoa, there was gold, there was frankincense, there was myrrh. That means there was 3 little old men traveling with these little chests of things to drop off for a baby. But to tell you the truth, these kingmakers from the east traveled with an entire army. Hundreds and hundreds of riders on horseback. And there may have been camels, but they were probably at the end bringing the stores up. I think it terrified Herod. This army shows up and says, We're looking for him that is born King of the Jews. It doesn't say exactly how many were there, nor does it say how many of them were wise men or magi. As we look into here and we see the magi when they arrive to Jesus, what's the first thing they did? They worshiped him. It's an interesting thought. We see a picture here depicting the Magi coming into Herod. And you look at the look on Herod's face there. He's troubled. He's really wondering, what in the world is going to happen in my kingdom? How am I going to overcome this? I believe Herod was in the Herodian, which is overlooking the shepherd's fields. And I do believe that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Ephrata, somewhere between the threshing floor of Boaz and the tomb of Rachel, in these fields. Guess what? The Herodian looks over the shepherd's fields. He was that close to Jesus and he missed him. How close are you to Jesus? Are you going to miss him? Are you close enough? Are you, as some say, 18 inches away? Do you have the head knowledge of it, but not the heart? How close are you to Jesus? You see, Herod was really close and he missed him. It's interesting to think about these Magi as they came into the land. They were Gentiles. You know, we're Gentiles. At least I am, I should say. I don't know about you, but many of us, especially in America, are Gentiles. And you know what? The first people to worship Jesus were Gentiles, the Magi. They were looking for the Messiah to come because the ruler of the Magi, Daniel himself, had passed along the teachings to them. What an interesting account now that we look at it through these lenses. They weren't three little old men. They were an entire army coming in to seek the King of the Jews, he that was born King of the Jews. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. And as they worshiped there, they showed us what we should do as well. We should worship him. And they gave him gifts suitable for a king, didn't they? Suitable for a king. They gave him gold for the kingship. They gave him myrrh for his priesthood. And they gave him frankincense. And they declared him, as it were, the servant, the Son of Man, Son of God, and King. And it's interesting that this would be in Matthew of all, because the Gospels, you know, talk about these attributes of Christ. You know, Mark talks about him as a servant. Luke talks about him as the Son of Man. John talks about him as the Son of God. And Matthew, where it says, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews?" A quote from the kingmakers himself speaks about Jesus as king. Matthew is using these Magi to further show that Jesus is anointed not only by God, but by the kingmakers of the East. God is the master planner. I tell you what, you can't outplan him. You can't outthink him. You can't outwit him. He shows us through the Magi. He shows us through the birth. He shows us through fulfilled prophecies that Christ is the King of the Jews. Born in the land of a virgin. Born to take away the sin of man. And only God could make up a master plan like that. What an amazing thing we see. So I hope over these few episodes here, we've changed your view of the Magi, of the wise men. I hope that you see now exactly how they would have arrived into Jerusalem, riding on stallions, on beautiful steeds, powerful and fast. How they would have come in their prominence. How they would have been known throughout all the lands as these are the ones who anoint kings. These are the ones who tell us who the next king is going to be. I hope you no longer look at them as little old men on camels. I hope you recognize them for what they really are. The kingmakers out of the east, riding beautiful Arabian steeds, coming to say, "Where is he born King of the Jews?" And if you thought that Herod was troubled because some little old men were looking for a little baby, think about it again. Remember that word, tarasso. He was so stirred inside. He didn't know what to do. He was beside himself. he wanted to kill every baby. And you know what? Jesus was born just a stone's throw from his own palace. And Herod missed him. Right under his nose, and Herod missed him. He missed the Messiah. Don't be part of that group that misses the Messiah. Like I said before, you may have the knowledge in your head, you may know who Jesus is, but do you trust in your heart who Jesus is? Have you ever come to that time where you've placed your faith in him, where you say, I know that I can't pay the debt that I owe for my sins, but I trust that Jesus Christ, born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, came to this earth and bore my sins on the cross for me. Have you placed your faith in him? And you now have the heart knowledge, not just the head knowledge. Please don't miss Christ this Christmas. If you have loved ones who haven't made that decision yet either, please don't go this holiday season without reminding them that Christmas is really Christmas. Thank you for joining us today.
One of the ways that we celebrate Christmas is to give gifts to one another. The wise men gave gifts to the Lord Jesus. They were suitable for him: gold, frankincense, and myrrh, prophet, priest, and king. God gave the gift of eternal life through Jesus Christ to us. But as we give gifts to each other during Christmas, I think we have some that are very unique in our store.
Of course. It's wonderful. And you may wonder why we're so passionate about this. Well, this really goes to help our friends on the ground in Israel, as they're not having any income right now with tourism being down, and to keep their hands busy making the items still.
Yeah, this is their suggestion. We offered to actually give them a gift. They said, no, we'd rather have you buy products because it keeps our hands busy. Our heart knows that you're thinking about us, and our head knows that there are people that are very concerned about the situation in Israel, and we are. So the items that you'll find in our store, they're authentic, they're very unique, and they're biblical. Let's take this one, for example. This one's called the Tree of Life, and it's found in Genesis. At the beginning of the Bible, it's found in Revelation chapter 21 and 22. And what a neat symbol. Matter of fact, it's also mentioned in Proverbs. But there's a whole variety of them. They go from very small to a larger one. Or this one is unique because it has the Roman glass behind it. The Roman glass is actually an antiquity itself. And that makes a great necklace independent of the Tree of Life. But these are some of the unique designs. You'll find many more, many sizes and shapes, all on the store.